Hi, I'm Darin Oduyoye, Chief Communications Officer for jpmorgan Asset and Wealth Management, and welcome to the jpmorgan 2022 Summer Reading List Series. We are pleased today to have Amy Herman join us, art historian and the founder and president of the Art of Perception, a New York City-based organization that focuses on professional development for leaders. Amy has traveled the world showing leaders how to use painting, sculpture, photography as ways to enhance perception skills and solve some of their most difficult challenges. She's here today to talk to us about her latest book, Fixed: How to Perfect the Fine Art of Problem Solving, which is featured on JP Morgan's 2022 Summer Reading List. Amy, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
So you have helped the FBI, NATO, senior executives, entrepreneurs, all improve their problem-solving techniques, and we're so excited to dive in and learn a little bit more. So let's begin with the basics. What actually inspired you to write this book?
It was actually pretty simple. I wrote a book 5 years ago called Visual Intelligence, and it was about how I use works of art to help people enhance their observation and perception skills. And someone at my publisher said, why do these people keep coming back to you? We know you teach them art, we know you're helping them to see, well, why do they keep coming back year after year? And I said, let me think about that. And I went home and I pondered it, and I realized everybody has problems. Yesterday's solutions are not going to solve tomorrow's problems. And every industry, every area had problems. And they thought, well, the art lady helped us to see more coherently. Let's go see if she can help us try to solve problems. And that was the inspiration for writing the book.
And I'm sure the problems just exacerbated as you think about the COVID environment and everything else that came with it.
Absolutely. And I started writing the book before COVID, before the whole pandemic. And as it happened, I thought, our problems are exponentially more complicated and we have more of them. And I was so grateful that the template of the book could actually be applied to some of the problems that we're facing, not just during the pandemic, as hopefully we start to ease out of it.
Now, the template starts with a paradigm focused on art. How much do you actually have to know about art before diving into the book?
Zero. Zero. You don't have to know anything about art, because I can say honestly, 99% of the people that I work with, and I would say probably 90% of my readers, don't have any kind of background in art. So it's designed for people coming in at ground zero. All they need is a pair of eyes attached to a human brain.
Speaking of looking at pieces, one of the central pieces you mentioned early on and is referenced throughout the book is the Raft of the Medusa. Tell us a little bit about this piece and why it holds such significance.
It's one of these works of art. It's iconic in the study of Western art, but more importantly, it's this huge, physically huge painting. It takes up an entire wall at the Louvre. And the reason I chose it, because so much of the subject of the Raft of the Medusa is relevant to us today. It's harrowing news. It was a confluence of all these terrible things, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it's in our faces because it's this big painting. It was this confluence of incompetent government, botched execution, a blame game, and a cover-up, all in one painting. Does that sound familiar in any way? There was just so much to see and unpack in this painting. It memorialized a ship running aground. And Géricault memorialized the painting in 1819. And it was a scandal in French society, and it made the news, and the government wanted to cover it up. And there were so many issues that I thought, even though it was done in 1819, it's a reflection of so many of the things that are happening in our world. And I thought it would be a perfect template for thinking about how we can approach so many problems and hopefully find innovative solutions to them.
Your approach is so dynamic. One of the things I loved about the book was how you divided it into key sections, really focusing on prep, draft, exhibit, really reflecting kind of the artistic process. How do you think this process actually applies to solving problems in everyday life?
Well, by breaking it down into those three sections, prep, draft, and exhibit, first of all, it's nothing that's too complicated for anybody. People don't want anything that's complicated. And I took the artist's process. How does an artist create a work of art? and use that to apply to problem solving. So really the overarching goal here is to slow down and think about the problem we're facing. Instead of jumping into a solution, let's slow down. Let's prep ourselves and prep our colleagues and think, all right, how are we going to tackle this? And then we have to think about multiple perspectives. Let's do different drafts of this. And I understand in emergency situations, we don't have the time for this, but if we just take the time to break it down into prepping to solve the problem, which involves defining the problem, drafting potential solutions, and then pivoting them, putting them out there. If you break it down, you slow down long enough to make sure that you don't make any huge errors in crafting a solution.
Now, when you think about slowing down, what do you do when you're talking to an FBI agent, or you're talking to a cop, or you're talking to someone who's in a very high pressure role where like the smallest error can be catastrophic? How do you talk to them and talk to them about how art can help them in their mission?
What they call something like that, where failure is not an option, where there'll be catastrophic loss of life, they call it mission critical. And when we're facing mission critical and they say, well, failure is not an option, in my mind, failure is really not an option for anybody. So I give them two basic ideas, two basic concepts to hold on to when we're looking at art. Number one, think about what you're not seeing. Think what might be hiding in plain sight that's right in front of you. And just knowing that there are things you're not going to see is going to make you look that much more carefully. And secondly, always solicit multiple perspectives. Always talk to other people for the very selfish reason that multiple perspectives make for better and more informed decision making. And when I think of Jericho painting the raft of the Medusa, not only did he talk to people who survived the raft, he interviewed them, he went to the morgue to look at dead bodies, he reconstructed a raft, he thought about all the possible angles before actually painting the painting. And I think before we jump into a solution, we need to consider all the possible angles so we don't run into a catastrophic failure in trying to solve the problem.
You know, it's funny, one of the topics you talked about was negative pertinence, and I loved the sort of definition of it. Could you elucidate a little bit about that for our team here?
Sure. It's a concept that I stole from emergency medicine, and I put stolen in quotes because it's not anything that's proprietary. What happens is when a patient comes into a hospital and say the doctor thinks they have pneumonia, and there are 3 symptoms to pneumonia. Symptom 1 is present, symptom 2 is present. But if symptom 3 is absent, it's negative. The pertinent negative that we need to say is absent because then it's not pneumonia. So for people that are not in medicine, how do we articulate what's not there? I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you have an expectation of behavior or that the market is going to do something, and then that expectation is not fulfilled, you need to say that it didn't happen. When you say only what you observe, you're only giving half the story. So talking about what's not there, I think, is critical to problem solving. We have this, we don't have this. Let's move forward knowing what we have and what we don't have.
You know, this is just one of the many gems of wisdom that is in your book, Fixed. I was also wondering if you could tease out a few of the biggest lessons that you have in there for CEOs, for managers, for other business leaders who could use tips on how to lead better teams or companies.
Absolutely. One of the concepts that I learned, actually, it's a beautiful physical image, makes for beautiful photography, happens with Mother Nature. It's called crown shyness. And it's where the tops of trees naturally get out of each other's way to let the sunlight in. It's just this beautiful image. And I was with some corporate leaders yesterday, and one of them said, you know, our philosophy is lead, follow, or get out of the way. I understand that, but after we looked at these images of crown shyness in the trees and we looked at different works of art, he took a different approach. And he said, you know, I realize maybe getting out of the way is sometimes the best way to lead. And when he said that, it just encapsulated all the things that I'm trying to bring together in the book, that the idea of looking at things from different angles, just taking a different perspective. And what do we do when we look at art? We stand to the left, we stand to the right, we walk around it, we think, what does this mean? I want people and managers in companies and in business to do that with their most difficult and intractable problems. There's never just one solution, and there's never just one approach. Let's treat it as a work of art, look at it from different perspectives, and shift your way of seeing. And in so doing, you clean your lenses and different solutions become apparent.
As you think about the lenses, one of the topics that you unpack in the book is really around bias. How do you think art actually helps you uncover biases?
Makes us ask very hard questions. When I told you before that I assume that people go in at ground zero with knowledge of art, when we look at art, they have to ask hard questions. What is this? What am I looking at? Who made it? Why does it affect me this way? And I think when we're trying to address our own biases, we have to ask similarly difficult questions. And I always say that I can't change people's biases, but making them aware of them can be really very powerful. Once we're aware of them, when we ask these hard questions, why do I like this? Why am I repulsed by this? Why does this offend me? We learn things about ourselves, and we can't confront our biases until we acknowledge that we have them. And I want to add that not all biases are bad, but I think that self-awareness is so important to our capacity working in companies, working with teams as managers and supervisors, that being aware of our own biases comes about from asking hard questions. And I give the model for asking those hard questions when we're looking at difficult works of art.
When you look at art, what's really fascinating to me is that the average museum goer really spends less than 30 seconds looking at a piece of artwork. And so if you kind of combine that with the shrinking attention spans of people knowing that all answers are basically one Google, Siri, or Alexa search away, what is it that you think that art can teach us that technology can't?
I'm going to steal a quote from one of my colleagues in the intelligence community in the FBI. And this is what he told me. He said, neurons that fire together, wire together. And there's great scientific evidence that shows that when you're looking at a work of art, your brain responds in a way that it doesn't to any other stimuli. So that you're engaging in what they call neuroplasticity. You're teaching your brain to look at things differently. And my hope is that by looking at works of art away from a screen, we all know how dependent we are on screens, you're exercising your brain in a way that my hope is that those neurons that fire together when you're looking at a work of art will come together again and wire together when you need to solve tough problems. Because let's face it, Google and Siri and Alexa can't solve everything. And I really believe from my earliest days in doing this, a police officer once said to me, there is no substitute for a pair of human eyes attached to a human brain. Artificial intelligence is amazing, but it can never be a pair of human eyes attached to a human brain. So by looking at works of art, we're exercising our brain in a way that I hope and I believe can help us solve problems at a later time.
That's great. And no matter what business you're in, you talk about data, and we're all obsessed with data no matter what company you're in. But you actually suggest that we should consider looking at art as data. Why do you say that?
Well, again, when people come to the art, either in my book or in my classes, sometimes they're looking at things for the first time. Many people have never seen the raft of the Medusa. And when I say to them, treat it as a new set of data, somehow that's less threatening to them because we can put parameters around a painting, we can put parameters around a sculpture, and it gives us sort of an opportunity to reset. When I say, think of this painting as a set of data, how would you describe it to me? That's less intimidating than saying, well, look at this painting and tell me all about it. With data, you can say, tell me what you see. It's fairly objective. And I know that works of art can be subjective and can be personal, but by looking at art, I'm taking people out of their comfort zone and I'm putting them in a non-threatening environment. I'm not testing their knowledge of art. I'm asking them, what do you see? And what problems can you identify in this work of art? And to use the F word, it's actually fun. They actually have fun trying to pick apart and unpack the problems in a work of art that I hope they'll take back to the workplace with them.
And what amazing art you have in there. I mean, from Monet to Matisse to Moretu to, Richard Serra, Christo and Jean-Claude. I mean, you have amazing artists in this book. I'm curious, are there any works that are favorites of yours and why?
Yes, actually, there's one that it's always spoken to me, and I was overjoyed that I was able to include it in the book. And it's not as well known as some of the others. It's a sculpture, and it's called Tables Rising, or I should say Rising Tables by Jennifer Odom. And it's a sculpture that stands sentinel on the banks of the Mississippi River with the New Orleans skyline in the background. And it stands high in the river. And the reason I love it, not only is it beautiful to look at this sculpture out there in nature, it's public art, and I have a real soft spot in my heart for public art. But the reason she stacked 7 tables on top of each other in the Mississippi River is that when it's rising up against adversity, and it's standing guard against post-Katrina floodwaters, because in New Orleans, when the levees break and the water comes in, what do people do with their valuables? They put them on the table. When we can't agree on a solution, what do? We come to the table. The table is such a symbolic piece of furniture. It's symbolic in problem solving. And New Orleans, which is this fabulous city that's had so many tragedies, she stacked 7 beautiful tables in a sculpture. They're just resplendent. And it reminds us all, the greatest takeaway, I think, from Rising Tables is that we all have to take affirmative steps to affect positive change. None of this happens on our own. We have to be the problem solvers. We have to be the lookers. We have to use our visual intelligence, because we're facing problems like we've never faced them before.
Wow, that is just amazing. I can't think of a better way to end. But before we actually conclude, I have to ask you, so clearly Fixed is on our summer must-read list. What book is on your summer must-read list?
Wow. Well, I have 2. Can I sneak in 2? The first one is actually a classic. And, we're living in a society where everybody's accusing everybody of everything. We're living in this divisive society. So I decided that this summer I'm going to read The Scarlet Letter. I'm going to reread The Scarlet Letter, thinking about accusations and facts and anger and subjectivity and that visual symbol of that bright A. And I see that, divisiveness and accusatory atmosphere, it's nothing new. So I want to reread The Scarlet Letter. And also on my must-read list is Trust by Hernan Diaz, thinking about wealth and capitalism from all different perspectives, different literary perspectives. And I just, like my own book, I love coming at things from different angles. So Trust is about capitalism coming from different angles, and The Scarlet Letter, rethinking our visual world and our accusatory world.
Excellent. Well, 2 additional books to add to our summer must-read list. Amy, we thank you so much for giving us such inspiring things to think about. We thank you for your time today, and we look forward to speaking with you again very soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be included on the list, and I hope it helps people to solve any problems that they're facing.
Excellent. And thank you to all of you for watching the JP Morgan 2022 Summer Reading List series. We hope you will join us again for another insightful interview with one of our featured authors. Thank you.